On Tuesday, Syracuse made a big announcement regarding its football program. Fran Brown is the new head coach of SU football, the 31st in program history. With Ian Nicholas, Jesse Cook, I'm Ben Spector. We'll break it all down right now. Ian, I'll start with you, though. Your first thoughts after the Fran Brown being the new head coach, the announcement.
If you told me about this 2 days ago, Ben, I would have said you made up that name. I'm being perfectly honest. I'm not the deepest college football aficionado, but from what I found out about Fran Brown, I'm really impressed with the resume. I don't know if he's necessarily ready to take on the challenge that is rebuilding a program but hasn't had a lot of legitimate success in the last 2 decades. But I'm excited because he is an elite recruiter, arguably the hottest recruiter in the country right now. It's a lot easier to recruit at Georgia than it is in Syracuse, but I love his mentality. He's got great connections not only in the Northeast, but also across the country, and I think he's going to provide some juice to this program.
Jesse, what do you think?
Honestly, I agree with Ian. My first thoughts about all of this is that this is a good hire for Syracuse because this is a weird turning point for SU. You're sort of at this crossroads where you have to decide whether or not you're going to compete in the immediate future for bowl games, for rankings, or if you're going to go into rebuild mode. And honestly, I think Fran Brown is someone who can sort of do both. It's his first head coaching role. He's not the first guy to do that with Syracuse. We'll talk more about that later in the show. But he's also got that recruiting cachet that Ian just talked about, and he comes from New Jersey. So he already has a foothold in the Northeast. And like Ian said, I feel like I'm repeating him, it's a lot easier to recruit for Georgia than it is for Syracuse, but he's got all those connections across the country, which makes a lot of sense for this team.
There's been a lot of information thrown out about Fran Brown. His most recent job was a defensive backs coach at Georgia. He's from New Jersey, but here's what Director of Athletics John Wildhack had to say in a press release after the hire was announced. John Wildhack says, quote, "Fran is an outstanding coach, recruiter, and person, and exactly who we need to take Syracuse football to the next level. Fran has had tremendous success recruiting to a variety of programs in the South, Southwest, and Northeast, and I have no doubt he will bring that track record here to Syracuse. I'm looking forward to welcoming Fran and his family to the Orange community. The future is bright for our football program." Jesse, we'll start with you here. How bright is the future, given that, like you said, Fran Brown has no head coaching experience, but he's also had a great track record of recruiting? That's really what Syracuse is bringing him in for.
The future is very bright. First of all, you take a guy who's just been training under Kirby Smart, someone who rocketed up the head coaching roles in college football.
Great visor, by the way, for Kirby Smart.
Yeah.
I mean,
I love the visor.
Fran's got a good hat game.
Fran, I've seen the beanie, I've seen the baseball cap. We don't know what he'll pull out in the dome where you don't really need a hat. But as far as that tenure with Kirby Smart, he's a great guy to learn from. So that's one thing. But also, yes, Syracuse is a team that has just barely scraped its way into bowl eligibility in recent years. So you do have to think, do they move up or do they move down? I think it's down immediately, but then way up once he gets his first season or two under his belt.
Right. The big thing recruiting-wise with him, I look at his most recent class with Georgia. He's recruited 3 5-stars to UGA. And yes, the Bulldogs are the 2-time defending national champions, but one of those 5-stars, the 3rd best recruit in the country, and you know I'm always going to find a way to shoehorn a Connecticut into a show. A Connecticut native. Yes, he plays at IMG now, but originally from New Haven, Connecticut. He's got those ties to North Jersey. We've talked a lot about Nunzio Campanelli over the last few days and his importance to Syracuse's program this year because Syracuse's current recruiting class has a lot of really talented New Jersey guys. Fran Brown is not only going to have a chance to retain the guys that Dino Babers brought in the recent recruiting class, but bring in the big names from Pennsylvania, where he coached at Temple for so many years, New Jersey, Connecticut, and all the powerhouse programs up here in the East.
You look at your screen right now, these are some of the recruits that Fran Brown has gotten. 3 5-star recruits to Georgia, like Ian had mentioned. Also a familiar name there, defensive back Elijah Clark. He recruited him to Rutgers. Elijah Clark committed to Rutgers as a 4-star recruit, then transferred over to Syracuse. And then 4 NFL names at the bottom of that list right there. So Jesse, interesting to see that while Syracuse hasn't been as successful in the recruiting world recently under Dino Babers, it's looking to turn the page on that with Fran Brown.
Well, every coach has his strengths and weaknesses. With Dino Babers, it was that he was a good defensive coach and a good motivator. With Fran Brown, it's that he can recruit and he still has that defensive mindset. So that really helped for a Syracuse team that has stayed on that half of the ball for its strong suit for so long now. But recruiting is how you build the future. And you look at those NFL players, not a lot of big names. And Tyquan Thornton, the only one who's even getting consistent playing time on the Patriots, he still only has 5 receptions. A couple of those guys ended up in the CFL at some point, playing for the Argonauts and Red Blacks. So the recruiting...
Wow, what a...
Ottawa
what a
Red
shout
Blacks.
out.
That's right. But
You just want to find a way to talk about the Patriots.
Right.
that's true.
All those receivers on the Patriots could be playing in the CFL.
Exactly. So his NFL talent from way back before he got to Georgia isn't very strong, but he's getting those top recruits now, or he has recently for the Bulldogs, which I think makes him very strong.
Fran Brown has said that the key to recruiting, it's about making sure that somebody wants to play for a coach and the logo. It's twofold for Fran Brown. He said that before he got this head coaching job, but take a look as to what he said when he got this head coaching job in that very same press release. He said, quote, "I am incredibly proud to be leading Syracuse football at a university with a rich and storied tradition of academic and athletic excellence. Syracuse football has outstanding talent, great facilities, and passionate alumni. The success of the players is my #1 priority. On and off the field, I want my guys to succeed in life because they played football at Syracuse. I'm ready to get to work and look forward to building something special for our fans." Ian, that's special. It's that special thing that Fran Brown was talking about. It's interesting to note because Syracuse started that out, and Fran Brown has started something special himself. He started as a Temple grad assistant in 2012, stayed at Temple, got promoted to defensive backs coach, then was the assistant head coach in 2016, then moved to Baylor for 2 seasons, back to Temple, still as the co-defensive coordinator and defensive back coach. He tends to work with the defensive backs a lot. Rutgers from 2020 to 2021, and then ultimately his final stop before coming to Syracuse, Georgia, the defensive backs coach there. But Syracuse building something special here, Ian, because they have the Lally Athletics Complex. They have
Yes.
this new NIL collective with Orange United, and Fran Brown is just another piece to that puzzle, don't you think?
Right. You know, you mentioned the NIL collective. That's the thing that is going to be the biggest hurdle, in my opinion, for Fran Brown here at Syracuse, because he's right. The facilities are supposed to be very solid when it's all finished, the Lally Zone, like you mentioned, in a few years' time here at Syracuse. And I do think the fans are very passionate, maybe a little too passionate sometimes. They think Syracuse is the Syracuse of old. In reality, they haven't been competing for championships, conference tournaments, or NCAA tournaments for decades. But the NIL needs to be better, right? They need a little bit more than what they have right now. This is a private university with a lot of money. And if he wants to bring in the top recruits, Ben, and he wants to get recruiting classes better than 50th in the nation, which was the peak, he needs a little bit of help. And something you mentioned, one last thing, you know, former defensive backs coach, yes, at Georgia, but in high school, at Camden High School, where Elijah Clark also went in North Jersey, he played quarterback. So he does have experience on both sides of the ball, and I think he can speak to any player on the team and speak so confidently.
And Jesse, that's what Syracuse really needed when they went out and hired Fran Brown. It was a mystery as to the type of head coach that Syracuse would go on to hire. Somebody with head coaching experience, somebody not, somebody young. Fran Brown, they turned to him, and they want him to be a player's coach, and I think he could have that ability, don't you? What do you think?
Well, if you ever hear the guy talk, he's very down to earth. He really talks to the person he's talking to feels like the most important person in the room. That's the impression I get from every interview he's ever done, and I have to imagine that he treats his players the same way. So you have to take into account that great defensive resume as far as Georgia possessing the best passing defense in the SEC this year, only allowing fewer than 180 yards per game. Also a team that was 4th in the SEC in rushing defense as far as yards allowed against. So he's got that, but he talks to the person, not the player.
So Syracuse hires a head coach, the 31st in his program's history, that has never had any head coaching experience. Well, this isn't the first time that Syracuse has done that. You go down the recent past and you see that there's a lot of coaches that Syracuse has hired in the past that have not been a head coach before. All the way back in 2005, Greg Robinson took over as the head man. Sure, 5-37. That doesn't look very good, right, Ian and Jesse?
No.
But then Doug Marrone, no head coaching experience prior to Syracuse, and he comes to the Hill and goes 25-25. You might remember Doug Marrone's name. He spent some time with the Buffalo Bills and the Jacksonville Jaguars in the NFL. Scott Schaefer as well, 14-23 in his time at SU, 2013 to 2015, was not a head coach prior to coming to the 3-1-5. Jesse, is this a cause for concern for Syracuse fans, given that Fran Brown has never led a group as the head coach before taking this job?
I think stats can be misleading sometimes.
There we go.
Because the truth is, you don't know. Fran Brown is an unknown. We know that he had a good time with Georgia as far as defense. We know that he can talk to the players. With Scott Schaefer, Doug Marrone, Greg Robinson, and you go back to Paul Pasqualoni, who was also first-time D1 head coach with Syracuse, they all had different things, but none of them came into an especially great program. Pasqualoni did, coming off of that perfect season. He got to coach Donovan McNabb as well, and Dwight Freeney. The rest, it was just downhill with everything.
Yeah, I just think overall, it's a tough spot to be in. This is a Power 5 job, but there's no sugarcoating it. This is not going to be easy. And I think this is a risk not only for Syracuse, but for Fran Brown. Because he is a really well-respected coach.
I mean, taking any head coaching job in college football is never easy. So given all the information we've learned about Fran Brown, given all the analysis that we've provided here in the Citrus TV special report, Ian, your final thoughts on the hire now and what Syracuse has to do in the offseason leading into next year?
I think given the candidates, this is an interesting one, but I can get behind this if I'm a Syracuse fan, which, you know, look, we're reporting for Citrus TV. We cover Syracuse football. We are going to have to learn who Fran Brown is, you know, and I think I can get behind him because he's real. Kind of getting to the point you mentioned, Jesse. He is a no-nonsense guy. You said down to earth. I guess I agree with that, but I really think that he's going to tell it to you how it is during the good times and definitely during the bad times, which the first year is probably not going to be super easy for him.
Jesse?
I think you're totally right, Ian, that it's going to be difficult out of the gate. But what can Syracuse do to make that transition a little easier? We've hinted at it. We've talked about it. Bring out the money. There has to be something that changes the NIL landscape, and maybe that's part of what made Brown an interesting candidate. Is we don't know what happened in the interview process, but maybe that's something that he brought up. In any case, Syracuse has to do better there, so that's how you start. A guy who knows how to recruit, he also should know what players want.
So with this football program, they have the Lowry Athletics Complex, the new NIL collective, Orange United. Ian, you say you can get behind it with this recruiting that Fran Brown is known for. He also was at some pretty good programs before coming to Syracuse. And Jesse, you look forward to seeing what this NIL collective and Fran Brown could do with that with this SU football program. We'll have full coverage of Syracuse football and continue to do so on all social media at Citrus TV Sports. From Jesse Cook and Ian Nicholas, I'm Ben Spector saying so long and have a great rest of your day.